Adrian Whitmore was a man the city could not ignore. In the heart of New York City, his name carried weight in boardrooms, luxury hotels, and private clubs. He owned skyscrapers that touched the clouds and companies that stretched across continents. People often said he could buy almost anything he wanted, and most of the time, it was true. His mansion stood on a quiet hill overlooking the city, a massive estate made of glass and white stone, with iron gates that opened only for the important and the powerful. Inside, everything shined: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, golden frames, and rare paintings collected from around the world. Servants moved quietly through the halls, trained to be almost invisible. Adrian liked things perfect: his schedule, his clothes, his image, and especially his reputation. He was known not only for his money but also for his confidence. Some called it charm, others called it arrogance. He enjoyed being the center of attention at every event he hosted. His parties were famous across the city, attended by celebrities, politicians, models, and top business leaders. If someone received an invitation from Adrian Whitmore, it meant they had reached a certain level of importance. But behind the bright lights and expensive champagne, Adrian had a personality that few truly understood. He believed success was proof of superiority. To him, the world was simple: winners stood on top, and everyone else stood below. He often joked about ordinary people during private conversations with his wealthy friends. They would laugh loudly, holding crystal glasses filled with the most expensive drinks money could buy. Adrian never considered himself cruel. In his mind, he was just being honest about how the world worked. He started from a comfortable life, educated in elite schools, surrounded by privilege from childhood. He worked hard, yes, but he never had to worry about missing meals or unpaid bills. Still, he loved telling the story of how he built everything from nothing, even though his version of nothing looked very different from reality. At home, the mansion ran like a well-organized machine. Dozens of staff members worked daily to maintain its beauty: cooks, gardeners, drivers, cleaners, and assistants. Among them was a quiet maid who had worked there for years. Adrian rarely noticed the individuals who cleaned his floors or prepared his rooms. To him, they were part of the background, like furniture or decorations. He expected loyalty and silence, and in return he paid them well enough to keep them there. Every year, Adrian hosted one grand event that was bigger than all the others. It was the highlight of the social season in New York City. This gala was not just a party, it was a display of power. The guest list was carefully selected. Only the richest and most influential people received invitations. News reporters waited outside the gates, hoping to capture photos of luxury cars arriving one by one. Inside, designers competed to dress the guests, jewelers lent diamonds worth millions, and chefs prepared dishes that looked like art. Adrian loved standing at the top of the grand staircase, watching everyone admire what he had created. It made him feel unstoppable. In business meetings, he was sharp and strategic. He could close deals in minutes that others struggled with for months. Competitors feared him, partners respected him, and the media often described him as a visionary billionaire. But those who worked closely with him knew another side. He enjoyed testing people, especially those he believed were beneath him. Sometimes it was a small comment, a joke that sounded harmless but carried a sharp edge. Other times, it was a public challenge meant to remind others of their place. He believed life was a game, and he always intended to win. Empathy was not a word he used often. He valued strength, confidence, and boldness, but he rarely stopped to think about kindness. In his world, appearances mattered more than feelings. If something looked powerful, it was powerful. If someone looked successful, they were worthy of attention. And if someone looked ordinary, they were easy to overlook. As the date of his upcoming gala approached, Adrian became more excited than usual. This year's event would be even larger, even more luxurious. He wanted headlines, he wanted admiration, he wanted people talking about him for months. Standing in his office with glass walls that showed the entire skyline of New York City, he smiled to himself. Everything in his life felt controlled, predictable, perfectly arranged. He believed nothing could surprise him anymore. After all, he had seen every level of wealth and power. Or at least, that is what he thought. In that glittering world of marble floors and shining chandeliers, Adrian Whitmore felt untouchable. He had no idea that soon, one simple decision, made as a careless joke, would challenge everything he believed about status, value, and respect. While Adrian Whitmore ruled his world from the top floor of his glass mansion, someone else entered that same house each morning through a small side gate near the kitchen. Her name was Marissa Cole, and unlike the guests who arrived in shining cars, she came quietly on the city bus from the far edge of New York City. She wore simple clothes, comfortable shoes, and carried a small worn handbag that held her lunch and a folded photo of her daughter. Marissa had worked in the mansion for almost 8 years. She knew every corner of the house, every fragile vase, every expensive carpet that needed special care. She moved gently through rooms filled with things worth more than her entire lifetime of savings. But she never complained. To her, this job was not about pride or embarrassment, it was about survival and opportunity. Because at home, in a small 2-bedroom apartment above a grocery store, her world was very different. That world revolved around her daughter, Nia. Nia was 19, tall, graceful, and carried herself with a quiet confidence that surprised people who did not know her story. She had grown up watching her mother leave before sunrise and return after sunset. She had seen the tired smile on Marissa's face and the careful way she counted every dollar before paying bills. From a young age, Nia understood something important. Nothing in life would be handed to her. But instead of becoming bitter, she became determined. She studied hard at school, often staying up late at the small kitchen table with borrowed textbooks and library notes. Her teachers quickly noticed her intelligence. She asked questions others were afraid to ask, and she dreamed bigger than her surroundings. While other students talked about parties and shopping trips, Nia talked about scholarships, internships, and building a future that would make her mother proud. Still, she carried a quiet secret inside her heart. She had visited her mother's workplace only once when she was younger. Marissa had needed to pick up something important and had no choice but to bring her along. Nia still remembered the feeling of standing inside that mansion. The ceilings were so high they made her feel small. The air smelled like expensive perfume and polished wood. She had seen chandeliers sparkle like captured stars and floors so clean they reflected her face. At that moment, she did not feel jealousy. She felt curiosity. She wondered how different life must be for people who woke up surrounded by such beauty every day. But she also noticed something else. No matter how grand the house was, it did not feel warm. It did not feel like home. Her small apartment, though crowded and simple, felt full of laughter and love. And that difference stayed with her. As Nia grew older, she began helping her mother in small ways. She found part-time work tutoring younger students, saved every dollar she earned, and applied for programs that could open doors beyond their neighborhood. She believed education was her golden ticket, not luck, not marriage, not pity. Marissa sometimes worried that her daughter was carrying too much pressure. But every time she looked into Nia's eyes, she saw strength instead of fear. There was something special about the way Nia walked into a room. She did not shrink herself. She did not apologize for taking up space. Even in simple jeans and a plain shirt, she carried dignity like it was designer clothing. Neighbors often whispered about her potential. Some said she would become a lawyer. Others believed she might enter politics one day. Nia herself had not decided yet. But she knew one thing clearly: she would never allow society to define her by her mother's job. Marissa never told her much about the billionaire she worked for. She preferred to keep those two worlds separate. But Nia understood enough. She understood that while some people were born into opportunity, others had to build it from scratch. And she was ready to build. Sometimes at night, as sirens echoed in the distance and the city lights flickered outside their apartment window in New York City, Nia would imagine her future. She did not picture luxury for the sake of showing off. She imagined stability, respect, and the ability to give her mother rest. She dreamed of the day Marissa would no longer have to wake before sunrise to clean someone else's marble floors. What Nia did not know was that her life was about to cross paths with that glittering mansion once again. And this time, she would not enter as a curious child standing quietly behind her mother. This time, she would walk in on her own terms. And the people who once overlooked her existence would be forced to truly see her. The idea was born in laughter. Not the warm kind that fills a room with joy, but the sharp, careless laughter of men who believed the world belonged to them. Adrian Whitmore was seated at the head of a long glass table in his private lounge, high above the glowing skyline of New York City. Around him sat a small circle of powerful friends, investors, media figures, and social elites who treated his mansion like their second home. They were discussing the upcoming annual gala, the most exclusive event of the season. Names of celebrities and business tycoons were being mentioned, guest lists reviewed, designers confirmed. Everything had to be flawless. Everything had to impress. As the conversation drifted from serious planning to playful arrogance, one of the men joked about how predictable the guest list had become. Same faces, same diamonds, same fake smiles, he said, swirling his drink. Another laughed and added, "Maybe you should invite someone unexpected this year, Adrian, shake things up." The comment was meant as humor, but Adrian leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly as an idea formed. Unexpected. The word amused him. His gaze drifted toward the window, but his thoughts wandered downstairs, past the polished marble floors and silent hallways. He thought of the staff. Invisible, loyal, always present yet never truly seen. And then he remembered the maid, Marissa. He had overheard her once speaking softly on the phone about her daughter. Bright girl, studying hard, big dreams. Adrian smirked. "What about my maid's daughter?" he said casually. The room fell quiet for half a second, then burst into laughter. "You're joking," one of them said, nearly spilling his drink. "Exactly," Adrian replied, smiling slowly. He imagined the scene. A girl from a modest neighborhood walking into a ballroom filled with couture gowns, million-dollar watches, and people who measured worth by net income. To him, it was absurd. Harmless entertainment. A social experiment of sorts. His friends leaned forward, intrigued. "Would she even come?" someone asked. "Oh, I'll make sure the invitation looks official," Adrian said smoothly. "And if she does show up?" another voice teased. Adrian shrugged. "Then at least we'll have something interesting to talk about." More laughter followed, louder this time, echoing against the glass walls. For them, it was simply a joke. A break from the boredom of predictable luxury. None of them considered how such an invitation might feel to the one receiving it. To them, it was a game. The next morning, Adrian mentioned the idea to his personal assistant as if it were a brilliant creative twist. "Send a formal invitation to Marissa's daughter," he said while adjusting his cufflinks. "Full access, red carpet entry, the works." The assistant hesitated for a brief moment, sensing something unusual, but years of experience had taught him not to question his employer's decisions. "Yes, sir," he replied professionally. Downstairs, Marissa was polishing the silverware in the dining hall when she was called into the office. Her heart raced slightly, wondering if she had made a mistake. Adrian rarely spoke to staff unless something was wrong. When she entered, he handed her the envelope himself. "There's an invitation for your daughter," he said lightly. "Our annual gala." Marissa blinked in confusion, unsure if she had heard correctly. "My daughter?" she asked softly. "Yes, I hear she's quite accomplished," Adrian replied with a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Consider it encouragement." Marissa thanked him repeatedly, her voice filled with surprise and nervous gratitude. She did not see the amused glances exchanged behind her back. That evening, in the small apartment across town in New York City, Marissa placed the elegant envelope on the kitchen table. The paper was thick, embossed with gold lettering, heavy with importance. Nia stared at it in disbelief. An invitation like this was meant for billionaires, celebrities, heirs to empires. Not for someone like her. For a long moment, neither mother nor daughter spoke. The room felt smaller than usual, filled with unspoken questions. Why her? Was it charity? Was it a mistake? Or was it something else entirely? Nia traced her fingers gently over her name written in perfect calligraphy. She sensed something strange beneath the gesture. But instead of shrinking away, she felt a quiet spark ignite inside her. If this was a test, she would not fail it. If it was a joke, she would not be the punchline. Across the city, Adrian raised a glass with his friends that night, confident that he had just added excitement to his perfectly planned evening. He believed he controlled the narrative. He believed he understood exactly how this would unfold. What he did not realize was that sometimes the people you underestimate are the very ones who rewrite the story. The envelope sat on the small kitchen table for 2 full days before Nia finally gave her answer. It had arrived like a golden ticket from another universe, thick paper, elegant lettering, the kind of invitation most people only saw in movies. At first, she thought it had to be a mistake. But her name was written clearly, carefully, beautifully. Not guest, not +1, but her full name. Marissa watched her daughter closely during those 2 days. She could see the storm of thoughts behind Nia's calm face. Part of her wanted to protect her child from possible humiliation. She had worked in that mansion long enough to understand how wealthy people sometimes entertain themselves. But another part of her believed this could be an opportunity. Maybe they see your talent, Marissa said gently one evening. Maybe this is a door opening. Nia did not respond right away. She was staring out the apartment window at the busy streets of New York City, watching yellow taxis move like restless insects below. She understood something her mother did not. Opportunities rarely arrived without intention, and powerful people rarely acted without purpose. Still, she refused to assume the worst. If someone had invited her into a room full of influence, she would not reject it out of fear. On the 3rd morning, she picked up the phone number printed on the invitation and called. Her voice was steady, polite, confident. "Yes," she said clearly. "I will be attending." The assistant on the other end paused briefly, surprised. "Very well," he replied, quickly returning to professionalism. "We look forward to your presence." When Nia hung up, she felt something shift inside her. It was not excitement exactly, and it was not fear. It was determination. If this was a test, she would treat it like one. If it was a challenge, she would meet it head-on. Across town, in his high-rise office overlooking New York City, Adrian Whitmore received the update later that afternoon. She accepted, his assistant informed him. Adrian raised an eyebrow, then chuckled softly. "Interesting," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. He had expected hesitation, perhaps even refusal. But acceptance made it far more entertaining. He imagined the scene already. A modest dress, nervous posture, uncertain smile. He pictured whispered conversations, raised eyebrows, subtle smirks among his elite guests. In his mind, the outcome was predictable. Meanwhile, reality was unfolding differently. Nia began preparing not with panic, but with strategy. She researched the event, studied previous gala photos online, analyzed fashion trends, and observed how the elite carried themselves. She understood that appearance in such spaces was a language of its own, and she was determined to speak it fluently. Money, however, was another matter. Designer gowns cost more than her mother earned in years. Even renting something elegant seemed impossible on their limited budget. But Nia was not someone who gave up at the first obstacle. She reached out quietly to contacts she had built during her academic journey. A professor who believed in her talent, a mentor from a youth leadership program, a small network of supporters who had watched her grow. She did not beg. She presented herself with confidence, explaining the situation clearly. One opportunity led to another conversation, which led to another connection. Within days, doors began opening in ways even she had not expected. Back at the mansion, whispers among the staff started spreading. Some were excited for her, others worried. Marissa tried to focus on her work, but her heart felt heavier each day. She feared the unknown more than anything. Not because her daughter lacked strength, but because she knew how cruel high society could be. The week before the gala passed quickly. Adrian continued finalizing details, seating charts, menu tastings, security arrangements. The invitation to the maid's daughter had already become a private joke among a few close friends. They referred to it casually as the surprise guest. None of them imagined that the real surprise would not belong to them. The night before the event, Nia stood in her bedroom, looking at herself in the mirror. Her reflection showed calm eyes and quiet power. She did not look like someone stepping into a trap. She looked like someone stepping into destiny. She had made her decision. She would walk into that ballroom not as a maid's daughter seeking approval, but as a young woman who understood her own worth. And in that moment, miles away in his glowing penthouse, Adrian Whitmore remained completely unaware that the simple word yes had already shifted the balance of the entire evening. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in gold and glitter. From early evening, the streets leading up to Adrian Whitmore's mansion were alive with flashing cameras and polished luxury cars. Valets in crisp uniforms hurried back and forth as engines purred and doors opened dramatically. Women stepped out in shimmering gowns, men adjusted diamond-studded cufflinks, and the air carried the scent of expensive perfume and confidence. High above the glowing skyline of New York City, the mansion looked less like a home and more like a palace carved from light. Crystal chandeliers sparkled through the tall windows, music drifted across the marble entrance hall, and laughter echoed from the ballroom. Inside, Adrian Whitmore stood at the top of the grand staircase, greeting guests with his signature smile. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, every detail flawless. This was his kingdom. Every light, every flower arrangement, every carefully selected guest was part of a masterpiece he had created. As the ballroom filled, quiet conversations blended into a soft hum of wealth and power. Politicians discussed future deals near the Champagne Tower. Business tycoons compared investments beside the orchestra, and social media influencers posed for photos under golden arches of fresh roses. Everything was unfolding exactly as Adrian expected. And yet, in the back of his mind, he waited for one particular moment. Near the entrance, his closest friends occasionally glanced toward the doors, sharing subtle smiles. They remembered the special invitation. They were curious, amused, almost impatient. Would she really come? Across town, a sleek black car turned onto the private road leading up to the mansion gates. It was not flashy like the others, but it moved with quiet purpose. Inside sat Nia, calm and composed. The city lights of New York City reflected softly against the window beside her. She was not trembling, not rehearsing what to say. She was simply breathing steadily. When the car stopped, the iron gates slowly opened. Cameras shifted automatically, expecting another celebrity or billionaire heir. The driver stepped out first, then walked around to open the back door. For a brief second, time seemed to slow. A single elegant heel touched the pavement. Then another. And she stepped out. The gown shimmered like liquid starlight. It was not loud or over-decorated. It was breathtaking in its simplicity and power. The fabric flowed around her like a royal cloak, designed with precision, confidence, and artistry that only the world's top designers could achieve. Whispers began instantly. Who is she? Is she royalty? Is she a model? Cameras turned fully toward her now, flashes bursting like fireworks in the night. Nia did not rush. She walked with steady grace, shoulders relaxed, chin lifted slightly. Her presence did not ask for attention, it commanded it. Inside the ballroom, the large doors opened once more. The orchestra continued playing for half a second before the musicians noticed the sudden shift in energy. Conversations faded into silence. Heads turned one by one. Even the waiters paused mid-step. Adrian, still standing near the staircase, followed the direction of everyone's gaze. At first, he did not recognize her. The woman entering looked like someone who belonged on magazine covers and red carpets. Her gown caught the chandelier light perfectly, reflecting soft gold and silver tones across the marble floor. It was rumored to be worth $2 million, a masterpiece loaned through exclusive connections that few could access. But it was not the price that stunned the room. It was her confidence. There was no nervous smile, no awkward hesitation. She moved through the crowd like she had walked into rooms like this her entire life. And then Adrian realized. That was not a stranger. That was Marissa's daughter. For a split second, something unfamiliar crossed his face. Not anger, not amusement. Confusion. His friends looked at him, waiting for a reaction. But no one laughed. Because nothing about this moment felt like a joke. Guests began approaching her instead, introducing themselves, complimenting her gown, asking about the designer. She responded with poise, speaking clearly, intelligently. Within minutes, she was no longer the maid's daughter. She was the most captivating presence in the entire ballroom. The power dynamic had shifted quietly but completely. Adrian descended the staircase slowly, each step heavier than usual. He had expected entertainment, perhaps embarrassment. What he witnessed instead was transformation. The woman he thought would be out of place had become the standard by which the evening would now be remembered. And as the cameras continued flashing and admiration filled the room, Adrian Whitmore began to understand something he had never considered before. The real surprise of the night was not that she showed up. It was that she arrived unstoppable. The moment Nia stepped into the ballroom, whispers spread like wildfire. What had started as curiosity quickly became fascination. Guests who had once assumed they understood her life now found themselves scrambling to figure out who she really was. Her gown alone was mesmerizing, flowing like liquid light, crafted by a designer whose name carried as much prestige as any billionaire in the room. But it was more than the fabric, more than the glittering jewels adorning her wrists and neckline. It was the way she carried herself, with quiet confidence, effortless elegance, and a presence that drew attention without demanding it. Questions buzzed through the crowd like bees. How did she get that dress? Is she famous? Does she know someone powerful? And then came the whispers no one could ignore. She's Marissa's daughter, someone said under their breath. The realization spread almost instantly, and the murmurs shifted tone. From surprise to disbelief, and finally, to admiration. Adrian Whitmore, watching from his usual spot near the grand staircase, felt the room tilt in a way he hadn't anticipated. What had started as a private joke, a moment of entertainment at the expense of someone he assumed was beneath him, was unraveling into something entirely unexpected. Nia moved gracefully among the guests, engaging in polite conversation, answering questions with wit and intelligence. A few of the younger guests, who had expected her to falter, were caught off guard by her knowledge of art, fashion, and current events. One of Adrian's friends, a well-known investor, leaned over and whispered, "She's impressive." Another shook his head, muttering, "I didn't see this coming at all." Nia paused briefly near the center of the room, giving herself a moment to observe the scene. She saw her mother in the background, standing quietly among the staff, hands clasped, eyes wide with pride and nervousness. And she smiled inwardly. This was more than a gown, more than a party. This was a statement. Her presence alone was rewriting the assumptions that had always surrounded her. As the evening progressed, the truth about her came to light. It was not just her elegance or her dress that stunned the elite, it was the story behind her, carefully pieced together by those who had looked beyond appearances. She had excelled academically, earning scholarships and awards that spoke of her dedication and intelligence. She had talents in design and strategy, some of which she had quietly shared with a few mentors who recognized her potential early on. And she had managed to step into a world that had always seemed distant, not by luck, but through determination, careful planning, and unwavering confidence. Guests began to treat her differently, not as a curiosity, but as someone worthy of attention, someone who belonged. Designers approached her to discuss collaborations, journalists requested interviews, and even seasoned socialites nodded respectfully in her direction. For Adrian, the experience was a revelation. He had expected discomfort, amusement, and perhaps a little humiliation for the girl. Instead, he found himself observing a masterclass in composure and self-assurance. The private joke he had orchestrated had completely backfired. And yet, it was more than mere irony. It was a lesson. He realized that assumptions, no matter how carefully constructed, could never measure true value. In one quiet moment, Adrian found himself walking toward her, not with superiority, but with curiosity. He wanted to understand how someone he had dismissed so casually could command such presence. As he approached, Nia offered a polite, confident smile. No arrogance, no sense of triumph, just dignity and composure. He extended his hand in greeting, feeling an unfamiliar sense of humility. "You're remarkable," he admitted, the words tasting strange in his mouth. She nodded graciously, acknowledging his words without needing approval. By the end of the night, the entire gala had shifted. Guests were no longer discussing the glittering chandeliers, the rare wines, or even Adrian's extravagant mansion. The talk of the evening centered around Nia, the maid's daughter who had walked in with nothing but her presence and a $2 million gown. It was no longer a joke. It was a moment of undeniable impact. And as the music played softly in the background and the orchestra faded into a gentle hum, Adrian understood something he hadn't before. Power and wealth could open doors. But true respect and influence were earned through character, confidence, and grace. And in that single evening, Nia had earned more respect than he had ever imagined possible. She had arrived not just to attend a party, but to redefine the way everyone in that room saw her. And no one, not even the billionaire who had invited her as a joke, would ever forget it. The gala began to wind down, the music softened, and the last of the guests began to linger near the doors, reluctant to leave the glow of the chandeliers and the warm hum of conversation. Nia stood near the center of the room, graceful and composed, yet aware of the transformation her presence had caused. She had entered as the maid's daughter, an invitation meant to amuse, but she was leaving not as an outsider. She was leaving as someone who had redefined every expectation. Marissa, watching quietly from the background, could barely contain her pride. She had seen her daughter grow, work tirelessly, and carry herself with dignity in the face of challenges. But seeing it recognized by the very world that had long dismissed them both was overwhelming. Adrian Whitmore lingered near the grand staircase. The man who had orchestrated the invitation with the faintest hint of mockery now stood in silent reflection. The lesson of the evening was not lost on him. All his wealth, all his power, had created a stage. But it was Nia who had stolen the spotlight, not by arrogance or rebellion, but by being wholly herself. Guests approached Nia one by one, offering compliments, congratulations, and genuine admiration. Some tried to hide their surprise at her intelligence, her eloquence, and the calm authority with which she navigated the room. Others were openly impressed, asking questions about her studies, her achievements, and the incredible way she had managed to step into a world so different from her own. Even the most skeptical socialites found themselves captivated. For the first time that evening, Adrian watched without control, without influence. He realized that true power sometimes comes from those you least expect. It does not rely on money, status, or influence alone. It comes from character, resilience, and presence. The crowd began to disperse, but many lingered, drawn to Nia's quiet magnetism. Some whispered about the $2 million gown, but the focus quickly shifted to her confidence, her poise, and the undeniable proof that appearances could not tell the whole story. Adrian stepped forward finally, crossing the polished marble floor, his expression unreadable but thoughtful. "You've done something remarkable tonight," he said, his voice steady, but softer than usual. Nia turned toward him, meeting his gaze calmly. "Thank you," she said simply, her tone composed yet confident. "You made it possible for me to be here. What I do with the opportunity is up to me." Adrian nodded, a new understanding forming. He had believed that wealth and influence created respect. But tonight he had seen that respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned. And Nia had earned it in every sense of the word. Marissa approached her daughter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You made them see you," she whispered, tears glinting in her eyes. Nia smiled, squeezing her mother's hand. "It wasn't about them seeing me," she replied softly. "It was about me showing myself that I can step into any space and remain confident, proud, and true." The mansion, once a place of hierarchy and subtle judgment, had become a stage for a lesson in humility, dignity, and the power of self-respect. Even the staff, usually invisible in the grand events, glanced at Nia with quiet admiration. They had watched her grow, and now they saw what they had always known. She belonged, in any room, among anyone, without apology. Adrian watched as she moved gracefully through the last few remaining guests, conversing, laughing lightly, and maintaining the poise that had captivated everyone. For the first time, he questioned his assumptions about people, about class, about worth. He realized that the true power of the evening had not been his own. It had been hers. And he knew that he would carry this lesson for a long time. By the end of the night, the ballroom was emptying, the lights dimming, the chandeliers casting long, soft shadows across the marble. Nia and Marissa stepped toward the exit together, their heads held high, hearts full, and spirits unbroken. Adrian followed them for a moment, then turned back, silently acknowledging that some events leave marks far deeper than money or status ever could. The story of the evening, the maid's daughter who arrived in a $2 million gown and commanded the room with confidence, would be remembered long after the gala ended. Not because of the gown, not because of the wealth, but because of what it represented: resilience, dignity, and the undeniable power of showing up fully as oneself. As they stepped into the cool night air of New York City, Marissa squeezed her daughter's hand one last time. "You did more than arrive," she whispered. "You changed the rules tonight." Nia smiled softly, looking back at the glowing mansion one last time. "Yes," she replied, "but I didn't just change the rules for them, I changed them for myself." And with that, they walked away from the world that had underestimated them, stepping into a future where dignity, courage, and self-respect were the ultimate triumphs. For the billionaire, the lesson lingered like a quiet echo. Some surprises are not meant to amuse, they are meant to teach. And tonight, Nia had taught them all. The room may have been Adrian Whitmore's, the gown may have been worth millions, but the true victory belonged entirely to her.